Hey there, and welcome to the 10th installment of Let's Code. So last time we implemented the consumer portion of our receives messages functionality, and then using our adapter we pushed a subscribe method into our application domain. And then we finished it all off by representing our list of messages as a form of crude application state. Now this time we're going to pick up right where we left off. First off, we're going to run through and modernize our application file, mainly as an excuse to talk about, I would say a lame excuse to talk about separating your refactor and your lipstick code from your actual feature implementation. But then once we're all samesies on that file, we're going to hook up a handler to add messages to our messages list. And that should have the functionality pretty much implemented, but it's just going to be chock full of nasties. So we'll use the rest of the time to clean up that embarrassing initial implementation. And the whole time we're going to talk about our worst enemy. A shared, immutable state! So, all in all, it should be a pretty wild ride. So with our goals in mind, let's code.
So before we get into the moving and hooking up of these messages, we need a way to fire anytime an event comes or is emitted from socket.io. We need a way to dump that payload into this messages array. So before we do that though, looking over this file, I see a lot of opportunity to make this so much better. There's a lot of modernized patterns that we're doing on our other files that we've been working on, and this file just really seems out of date and crusty. So I would like to go ahead and just take this opportunity to clean this file up, make it a little more consistent with the other files, just so we have the same sort of feel and all that through our application. Now, typically when I do things like this, I want to keep it off of my feature commit. Or my feature branch, I should say. I'll typically create my own branch. It allows me to then take those changes and the prettying up and just have one pull request that is just changes. So that way I can get feedback on those changes outside of the feature I'm about to implement. And whenever I go to implement that feature, had I have made those changes in that pull request, a lot of the features will be lost in the noise of the cleanup. So it takes away focus from that. So in an effort to avoid that, I'm going to go ahead and just create a new branch here. And we are going to call it cleanup app. There we go. So now we got a new branch going. All right, let me go through and I am going to make these changes right now. So I think that's going to do it. If we want to see what we did, we can go ahead and just do a quick GD on this. So we'll do that real quick. What we're doing here is we have we moved our messages out into the higher level, added that function, the render function, and declared it outside so we have access to it within this application file. We went ahead and moved that default options from being a var to a const that is a frozen object. So that way it's going to be harder to change that default options. And it just provides better semantic meaning for what it is. I also went ahead and added a trailing comma at the last item. This, in my opinion, removes a lot of noise from get diffs or from diffs. It also makes it easier to move your stuff around if you don't have to worry about where that trailing comma is, if it's there, not there. Anyway, a lot of people hate me for it, but I really like that trailing comma. Here we have our functions. We went ahead and took our little helper and helper function in our private method, and we went ahead and made them named functions instead of being anonymous functions assigned to a symbol. It just gives us better predictability over hoisting and things like that. And also put in our trailing comma there on the adapter. There's us moving that out. And we went ahead and did the let syntax or destructuring, my goodness. We did the destructuring on like options and EL there just to clean it up a little bit, make it look a little bit better, easier to read, easier to follow. So those are the commits, and I'm sticking to it. Oh yeah, wait, there was one more. Yeah, we also removed the trailing semicolon after the named functions. Typically with a named function, you don't need semicolons in JavaScript, but typically, even if you are using semicolons, most people don't put the semicolon after a named function declaration. I don't know, it's just a standard that I've seen around. I'm sure there's reason for it, but it's just something that is done. All right, so now we'll go ahead and commit all, and we'll call this cleanup application lipstick. Okay, so we'll get this reviewed and merged in, and then move on with our lives and get this feature implemented. So now that we're all cleaned up, all we really need to do now to get this responding and throwing messages into our app is just take this adapter here and take the onMessage bit, and we just basically need a function that we can pass to that will add messages to our messages here. That really should be all we need to do to get that going. So let's get that cooking. Okay, so that should be added. Let's check here and go test. All right, no error, but nothing showed up. What the heck? Okay. You know what? I know exactly what it is. So mithril, I've been doing a lot of React lately, and React will respond and redraw based to changes on the properties as they get changed all the way down through your components. Mithril is it responds to user events. So certain events that happen in the UI, it responds to those, which makes sense for its layout. But we're running into that here. So they do have a way around this with a redraw. So we basically, I think, want to call redraw every single time that we have a message that comes in. So that probably shouldn't be part of this add message bit, as this is more a concern of the model. So we'll just change where we're doing our on message here and just throw an anonymous in to take care of that. Okay, so we'll check here now, and if we put hello, yep, we got it. Test, yep. This is cool, and I think, let's see here, if we move to here, do one of these, open up one of those, put that over there, do one of these, we should be able to say, hey there, and look, it's here and it's here. We can talkie. That is great. So that probably is all we need to do to get this going. Now, that being said, there are so many issues with this real simple implementation, but it's something to get us started. First of all, these messages here, they get passed down as is. So we basically have this state that could be shared between everything. So any component could listen or do something with this state. Right now, that means any component, the way that we have it now, can change that state. So that shared state is now mutable. And as we all know, shared mutable state is the devil's handiwork. So there's a couple things that we can do to get around this. We could go full on and implement a immutable library. There's a couple good ones out there. But right now, we really only have one piece of state that we need to worry about. And we don't really have enough information function to properly choose an immutable library, and we would be adding to it and could lock ourselves in before we know what we need. One of the common things I know I always do is I tend to abstract way too early, or I tend to bring things in before I'm fully aware of the implications of that or how the rest of my system is going to lay out. So there are ways we can get around that. So first off, all we'll really do is I think we should classify some of this or get it kind of grouped together. So for instance, the things that define our model is this messages here and this add message. So these two things are kind of its own, these are concerned with the model. So we could probably get away with just creating an object around that. So let's do that real quick. Okay, so we did a couple things here. We created this object called appState, and we moved the messages into that as a member of this appState object or a property on it. And we just made this little handler here that basically, whenever you pass it a message, it does a push on that. So here on 29, the other thing we did is we needed to change this to actually push messages down and push the messages from appState. Now we still have our mutability issue, which we'll address next. Okay, so let's start dealing with the immutability issue or the mutability issue. First of all, we can address this. Like right now, we're passing in just a, dare I say, naked property down into the component tree. Typically in mithril, you don't want to do that. You want to wrap everything in a prop. So we'll just do m.prop. And we will initialize that there. So this is going to create havoc all over the place because message.map isn't defined in log. And when we go to add messages, we are calling that, or we are doing it against the messages property and not the function. So here in log, we'll just come into here, and where messages map is, we can just do this. Now, that should get that working. Now, let's give this a test. Okay, so we still have our immutability issue here. So for instance, if since this is getting passed down right now into entry, if I were to go into, say, entry here, and I believe that's coming in, yep. So if we did attrs and we did messages and we set it to a string, watch what happens. Okay, that builds, we come in here and we do test. We get an error because this .message is not a function and it replaced that. So that right there is the issue with shared mutable state. So we don't ever want to run into situations like that. So let's go ahead and check that real quick. Yep, okay, so we're good here. And we'll go ahead and quit that. Okay, so we need to deal with that now. So since we have this set up to be a function right now, it's pretty easy because all we really need to do is wrap or use a handler that will pull and copy the information and return that copied list instead of the actual list. And since it's in a function, any of the calls to it, it's not going to, of course, set anything when you try to set it like a normal prop, and any calls to it is always going to return a copy or a snapshot at that state at that time. Now, right now, we're just going to do that with slice. That's very inefficient. It's not the right way to do it, but it's just one piece of state, and again, I don't want to lock ourselves into an immutability library that may or may not have the features that we need or has too much, things like that. So we'll just get away with this shortcut for now until our app state builds up. So let's get that in. Okay, So now that should work. All we really did was came in here and move this into a variable outside of this object. The reason why I do this is starting to look like it should be in its own home. So we're going to eventually move this out into its own file, and we'll get modular pattern encapsulation on this. There's no reason to ever expose this to the wild. But now what it's doing is messages is still a function now that we've got used to it being a function down the path, but all it does is it returns a messages call on that prop and then does a slice on it. Like I said, it's not very efficient. It's not something that we want to do, but at least we have an accessor for it to get them right now. And it still fits with our pattern. So since we are in the kind of the model mode right now, let's go ahead and move this into its own file. So here under JS, we'll just make a new directory called models. And here we'll do app-state.js, beautiful. And we'll jump into here. All right. So let's just look over what we did. All I did was I took the all the stuff that we had defined here, and actually let's go ahead and we don't need to do this anymore. We can do that. Okay, there we go. All right, let's just give this a test, make sure everything's fine. This is super hot. All right, and it is super hot, so that is beautiful. So all I did was I just moved that object into here and provided it as a singleton here, basically. Since we're not wrapping it in a function to rebuild it and give it new state as a factory, we're actually initializing it once and then passing that is the default. This is pretty much can be considered a singleton. And then from there, everything else should just hook up. So that's looking pretty darn good. Now there's one last little bit of ugly that I think we should address before we call this guy done. And this right here doesn't need to be an anonymous function. There's no reason for that. So we have two options here. We can go ahead and make that part of the application as a public method on the application itself to attach the handler. But since we're using modules and we're have this all set up in a module pattern, I think it might make sense to kind of keep this private. There's no reason for anyone outside of our app to need to call this handler. So we'll go ahead and add that as a private method here. That looks a lot better. Let's see if that's still working. We'll come over here, we'll go test. Yep, it's working there. Let's do a little socket test, and you know what, let's go ahead and open this up in Firefox this time. And we'll see what it does in Firefox. Why not? It's always good to try stuff in different browsers. Alright, so we'll go localhost 1337, and we'll go, hello from Firefox. And there it is. So we have it. Hello from Chrome. Yeah, so it's working just fine. All right, so I think we are pretty much done. There's probably some other cleanup and things that we can do. And actually, you know what? Let's just go ahead and test and make sure that our little effort to change our state from a mutable one to a more immutable one. Let's make sure that that effort was actually worth it. So we'll jump back here into entry. And in entry, we will go ahead and do attrs dot message, and we'll try to set that to Joey. Okay. Messages. Silly spelling. Okay, and everything's fine. So it didn't clobber our state, and everyone has a copy of their own state. So that's good. And even if we were to take that state and change it, so for instance, if we were to say let array equal, or let state equal attr's dot message messages, and do state is equal to happiness, and console.log state. And actually, let's do that here as well. We see that we get back an empty array, and we have happiness. So next time we do it, nice shot, man. Oh, there was no reason to re-render that. Anyway, so we are good. Yeah, I think we're good. So let's go ahead and we'll get all this junk out of here. No reason to have that. Make sure that we are good here. Yep. Okay. So with that, we are ready to get a commit up and going. Well, all that's really left to do now is to get a commit in there. We have all the functionality implemented. We have the ability to send messages, test, and hello. So we can send messages through different browsers going through the server and talk back and forth. And we have all of the functionality in the tutorial implemented to this point, except for some styling that we'll need to address on the actual message items inside of our log. But we'll take care of that coming up. We will be starting on this homework stuff because there's some information and some things I want to get or figure out about socket.io before we start on the next project. This whole thing was just to learn the ins and outs of socket.io. So now that we have everything in our nice little build system, implementing this homework is going to be a lot easier because we already have kind of a path, a component, bit set up and all that. So anyway, let's just go ahead and get a commit in here now. So we'll come in here. This has been bothering me for a while. I want to go ahead and fix this. Let's go over here and see what changes we made. Oh, that's cute. Alrighty. Okay, so this is us getting the app state in there. Okay, moving those messages out. We wrap them in that mprop. We have on message. This is our handler for the part coming into the adapter. You know what? We still need to clean up. We're sending the entire adapter down. Probably shouldn't be doing that. So we'll address that and get a look at that in the next coming episodes. But right now, I think this is good enough for government work. All right, so let's go ahead and create a new branch. So we'll get create branch, and we're going to call this finish receive messages. Okay, and let's make sure. Okay, so we'll get add everything. What are we adding in that models? Okay, we just have that app state.js, so that's good. All right, so now we'll get commit all and say added app state and finished receive messages functionality. And we will give this a clap because we should clap and a ta-da. Why not? It's a clap and party time. Not a slap. Oh my goodness. But a clap. Okay. So we have that now. Looks like that is done. And we can call this feller finished.
Well, that's going to do it for this segment. Be sure to come back next time where we'll be slapping some styles on the actual log entries, and then take some time to clean up and reorganize and do some final spit and polish on our code before we get ready to move on to the homework portion of the tutorial. So all in all, it should be a pretty clean time. So if you want to stay up to date with all the latest episodes, be sure to hit subscribe, and if you want to like or comment or anything down below, your feedback is greatly appreciated. So until next time, remember, if you find yourself bored in life, chances are you're probably not doing it right.